Hello, and welcome back to our series where we are building a people and culture management system, or HCM, depending on the terminology. This series is brought to you by Prairie HR Solutions, and my name is Jake Finger, Principal Consultant here at Prairie HR Solutions. And in this video, I would like to change views. Now, there's two ways that we can approach this. And what I mean by changing views is obviously total rewards is going to be one view, talent intelligence is going to be another, operations will be another. And then even within operations, we have records and compliance reporting. So I want records to produce one view in the operations view, and then compliance reporting to render another view. Now, there's different ways that we can do this. We could just create it in one HTML file and then set each one of these sections, this compliance reporting or record section or whatnot, we can set it to either show or not show. And in doing it that way, I personally have found out that it gets really confusing having that massive HTML file for each view because you got to kind of scroll down and collapse it. And since I'm wanting to have each of these category views go into our nav to where an individual can say, well, I don't want to do that. Let me just go straight to my operations, or I'm in operations. Now I want to go here, or, vice versa. It's just a little cleaner for me and it's a little bit more linear. Plus, it gives me an opportunity to show y'all how to show different views from files. And the files that I'm referring to, let's go back over here to our code. I've created this operations page. So instead of just using this PCM home, which is what we have been doing, I would like us to either do home or this operations page. Now, this operations page, all I did was copy the Prairie PCM page for now, anyway. And in order to do this, here we go. In order to do what I'm wanting to do, what I'm going to look for is the URL. So right now, our URL is going to look something like this. And I know you can't see it, so I'm just going to grab it. The way I have my screen shared, you're not able to see the URL up here. So I'm just going to grab it and come back over to our code. And I'll just put it right here in a comment. So if you're following along, your URL for that web app should look something like this. And you'll either have this dev at the end of it or exec. So since I'm developing this now, I have it end in dev, so I can simply refresh it without having to republish it every time I change code. And what we're going to want to do is we are going to pass various parameters. So you can think of this as our base web app. And we're going to have different layers in this base web app. And in order to access those layers, we have to do some stuff. So I'm not going to go too much into URLs or all that, but just know that in order for us to pass different parameters from a URL, we can type a question mark, and then we need to give that parameter a name. Since essentially we're creating different pages, I'm just going to say it's a P, and then we want P to equal something. And right now we will just say home. So what we're wanting to do is using this do get function, because do get gets HTML. It gets anytime that you're trying to do something with HTML or a page, you would use do get. And, the other one is do post. You want to post something to it. But right now we're just getting something. So in this do get function, we're wanting to get not only our base, which we have been, but also this question mark and everything after this question mark. And this piece, this P equals home or equals whatever, is really what we're looking for. So we can check to see if this is equal to home. Then we want to run the PCM home and evaluate it. And if it's operations, we want to do something else. So first we need to give this parameter a name, and let's call this parameter that it's getting an E. Let's pass it to the function. It's already being passed to the function. We just need to identify it. It's the best way to think about it. And instead of doing it this way, I'm not going to be able to evaluate it right off the bat. But what I am going to have to do now is create another variable. So let's just create that variable. Let's call this let's just call it home view. And that home view is going to be equal to this. Now we're not wanting to evaluate it yet because we're wanting to check to see if this parameter equals home or not. So before we evaluate it, we can check this with an if statement. And what we're going to check is e dot parameters dot, and we used p for page. So if the parameters that are coming over from that web page, if the parameters of p equals, and we're only going to do 2, don't do 3, do 2 equal signs. And if it equals, let's just do operations, because our default, that else piece, is going to be our home page. If it equals operations, then we want to return another function. And I'm just doing it this way for now because we're going to have obviously a lot of pages. We're going to have 6 of them, to be honest with you. And what that's going to have us do is use an if statement to check all those. And an if statement, the longer it gets, the slower it gets. So I may end up doing this a different way by, like routing it differently. But for now, this will work. And if it doesn't equal operations, like say it's equaling home, then we want to do something else. And what we're wanting to return is our home page. And to return our home page, we can simply just grab our home view and then evaluate that, because now it'll run it. And then we can set the title to Prairie PCM. Dot. Oops. Too many dots. There we go. So now if we were to save this and simply take this, which is exactly what I'm going to do, I'm going to copy this. And if we were to take this back to our page here, and up in our URL bar, we simply paste this to where we have dev $p equals home and hit enter, you'll see that nothing changed. It's still doing the same exact thing, except we built in that if statement. So if we were to type in, instead of home, you go up there, select home, delete it, and type in operations and hit enter, nothing else is going to happen because we have to build that function. So this is the default view, and this is the home page. So let's go back here and create this load operations. So let's create this function, and what we're wanting this function to do in the end, of course, is load that page. So we would simply use HTML service create blah 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 PCM home. It would be operations home. But for now, let's return simply HTML. So let's just create an HTML output, and the output that we're wanting to produce is, let's just do a header, and we'll say, hello, you are on the ops page. just to ensure that we get something and this is correctly being called. So now what will happen is if it equals operations instead of home here, it will call this function and it will simply clear everything and just render this HTML saying, hello, you're on this ops page. So let's save this and let's go back to our web app page. Now, when I refresh this, the reason why it's here is because my URL, you see when I refreshed it, it showed hello, you are on the ops page. The reason it did that was because my URL was still set to operations. So now I'm going to go back and I'm going to change this operations to home and hit enter. And when I hit enter, it's going to render the home page. So we've effectively created two different pages or two different views, so to speak. Now we just need to grab that ops page and have it render that. So let's come back over here. And this load operations, what we're wanting it to run is not this HTML. We don't need it to be this HTML. What we need it to do is render a file from output. So we can just simply grab this and place it here. And instead of PCM home, we are wanting to do operations page because that's the file that we're wanting to render. And then let's add something to the title. Now this title, when we set this title, it's the tab up in your browser. That's what it's called. That's what the title is. And if you do happen to have a favicon, those little icons that go in those tabs, you can also set the favicon as well. And then we'll come up here and do PCM home as that title. So now it's going to render this page, but this page is going to look exactly the same as the others. So instead, I'm going to create something else here. And we have that container, which contains our drop downs. I'm going to create another container, div class, container. And we will end that. Okay. And what I would like in this container is, one, I want to give it a little bit of space. So you'll see that we have this MB3, which is the margin bottom 3. If we just run this, it will be right up against our next container. Well, I'll leave it like this so you can see it and then see what it is that we do to fix it. Let's go over to our bootstrap here. And what I'm going to want is an input field. And the reason why I want an input field is our operations, I'm going to focus first on the records. And the records is going to consist of what's called a CRUD, a create, read, update, and delete. So we can interact with those records. And I'm not going to obviously do delete because in HR, we don't really delete anything unless it's well past its retention schedule. We just archive it, but we'll just call it CRUD and just know that the delete is going to be archived. But in order to do so, we need a unique value or identifier for each one of those employees. Now, being in HR, we know exactly what that is. You can't use last name because you can have multiple people with last name. First names are even worse. And we really don't want to touch their social security number and have that floating around. So what we do is we create these unique identifiers called employee numbers or employee IDs. So I'm just going to grab this field, and this is going to be our employee ID because I really do like those spans. So let's come over here and we will put that new field here. Now, up to this point, we have been running with the default style display. And the style display by default is set to block. And what block does is it shows it shows this div if it's set to the div, and that div takes up space. So that is when it's set to block, and that's default. You can set it instead to none, which hides it and doesn't allow it to take up space. So we're going to utilize that here in a second. But first, let's change our span, and our ID for this span is going to be, let's just do imp ID span, and this is going to be described by imp ID span, and the rest of our screen reader stuff. Okay, here we go. Our placeholder is not going to be username. Our placeholder is going to be employee ID. And okay, good. So right now, by default, let's save this and then go back to our page here. Now that we've done this, in order to get the views until we assign how to change this, is by going up here to this URL and ensuring it's on the correct view. So right now this is home. What we need to do is change this home to operations and hit enter. And you'll see it's populating a different page. It's populating that file, that operations page file. And you see that our first container and our second container are just right up against each other. So I'm going to separate that. I'm going to give a margin top a value here, and let's go back over here to this container, and let's add the margin top 3. 3 seems to be a good one. And go back over here and refresh it. There you go. Nice little space there. Now, the reason I'm doing the views like this with the URL is because we can set a link, whether it's in our nav bar or a button or something, to that URL that has that P equals whatever, home or operations. That way we just link it to a button, and then when somebody pushes that button or does something, it automatically goes to that view. And you'll see that this is visible. This block here is visible, and it's taking up space. And the reason it's doing that is because the style, the CSS style, is equal to display set to block. So let's save this and then go back. You'll see that because it's default, nothing changes, still there. Now, if we were to go back here and set this to none, and then save it, and then come back here and refresh this, because we're still on operations, you'll notice that it's still there in our code, but it's not visible and it's not taking up space. So what we can do is we can create a section, one for records, and toggle that visible or not visible or taking up space, block or none. And then we can do the same thing for compliance reporting and toggle that one on and off. Now, if we were to do it in one big massive HTML file, we would have to figure out what is being toggled off and on and when. And that's where it gets confusing, to where if we just do our separate pages, we only have to worry about 2 or 3 or 4, however many. It's just easier to manage. So let's focus on our records piece and our compliance reporting. So come back over here and let's work on toggling. So let's just quickly give our container a title, and we'll do this. We'll just do this in an H5, so it's not so big. And we'll do records H5. And then what we're going to want to do is instead of having this div, this second, I don't want to put everything into a new container. So what I'm going to do instead is I am going to create another div, and that div here is going to contain this style none, because I'd like to keep the container. But what we can do is move this style none down here, and then create the div down here. And this is going to be our records section. Now what I can do is give this div an ID, so we can call that record section when we need to. And let's set this back to block. And then let's copy this whole thing underneath this and then create a, let's do a compliance. So we'll call this second piece here compliance, compliance reporting. And then we'll set this to block. And this we can just call compliance for now, just as a placeholder. Our ID, we'll have to change this ID to compliance span. And our span here, well, I actually don't think we need any of this yet. You don't need anything of that yet. We'll just leave the title there, compliance. And this is going to be compliance section. So now let's save this and then go back to our page here, and we'll refresh it. And as you can see here, we have a records piece and then a compliance piece. So let's go back and actually give our compliance piece some guts here. And we'll just call this, report type for now. That'll be fine. And we'll have to change this to this here, and placeholder, we'll just call it report type. And then this here will be report type. Okay, so good. So let's save this. And actually, let's come over here and grab a button so we can just quickly toggle it on and off. Grab a button. We'll just grab this button is fine. We'll come back over here. We'll share our tab, and then we will put at the bottom of all this. So this comment should be compliance. Okay. Oops. And instead of primary, we will say this is toggle. And what we're wanting to do is set this to a function on click. And that on click is going to equal, we'll just call it toggle for now. And we're going to need to create this toggle function. And what this toggle function is going to do is every time this button is pushed or clicked, it's going to listen for that, it's going to grab it, and then it's going to change the display from block to none. And we're only going to do that to this. We'll do this to the compliance reporting just to show you how it works. And then I'll go in and tie it to other things offline here. So we really don't need this right now. I suppose we can keep that. We'll keep it just so we can change it from home.js to operations page. Let's just create a new script tag here before it runs that. And in this script tag, what we are going to do is we're going to create a function, and let's just call this function right now toggle, because that's what we named it. And what we're going to need to do is get the elements, and we'll call that element, and this document, get ID, is what we're going to need, and the ID is we're just going to do compliance, so we need this piece, the full div. All right. Okay, perfect. And what we are going to want to do with that, not get the value because it doesn't have a value. We just need to identify it and set the focus on it. And then we can write an if statement and we can check if that element, the style display of that element is equal to none. And if it is, we want to take that element and set the style display to block. And if it's not, we want to just set it to none. And this is a really handy code snippet that you can use to toggle the display on and off. So we have that button toggle, button primary. Okay, so let's save this. And what we'll do is we will come back over here to our page. And now remember, everything is set to block. So it's showing and it's taking up space. So let's refresh this. And you see that we have our records section or grouping and our compliance. Now these are two different divs. And we have our toggle button. So when I push this toggle button, this compliance should toggle from block to none. So let's see if that works. And it does. So you see it's not taking up space and it's not visible. So now what we can do is link this instead of having it run by a button. We can chain a function to check to see the value of our second drop down here. And if it's records, we toggle records to block and compliance to none. And if it's compliance reporting, we just do the same, only in opposite. That way we don't really need to toggle it, but it's nice to know how to flip-flop these back and forth. So I hope that you've enjoyed this video and it was informative on the views as well as toggling display and nones to none and block, I mean. If you are finding these useful and beneficial, please hit that subscribe button and we can continue to bring you these videos. And until next time, please take care.